Okay. Okay. It looks nice. Anna. For you. Eva. For you.
Thank you. No, Anna, I know what you mean.
Hey guys, take a look at the tables. Are there any? I just said lunch today, so I want to make sure that kids wake up. There's no food on these tables, is there? It looks like there's food. Hi, Lizzie. Here you go.
I can like smell it.
Here, hands off yourself. Hands off others. Marcus?
Because I always give them my crayon to put away. Because I don't feel like putting it away.
I did, me too.
I have to leave tonight. I'm doing after school for tomorrow. Chapter 9, please.
I don't think I can. My bus is at 2:30
Bus to where?
for football.
Alright, so find me during the day then. Find me during the day tomorrow. And make sure you check in your absence folder. Were you here Friday, Blake?
No, I was out both days. I was out for practice.
You checked, did you get the sheet I gave you tomorrow?
Yeah, I saw that.
Alright.
Did you get my cases?
What?
Did you get my cases?
Yeah, I got them. I'm going to give you the blue folder back. I'm going to grade them though first.
Okay.
Good afternoon, everybody. I'm giving quizzes back now. A couple of announcements, just to kind of bring everybody up to speed. Haley. This week we're going to kind of alter things a little bit. We're going to spend another day today on chapter 9. Tomorrow we're going to start chapter 10. You will not have a quiz this week because of the short week. Your quiz on chapter 10 will be Monday, and your inquisitive for this week is extended to Monday as well. So you do not have a quiz in inquisitive, but it will be next week. Happy return from a long weekend. Hopefully you guys all had a good weekend, and you were able to kind of rest and catch up on whatever, sleep, enjoying yourselves, having fun, getting things done. How'd football do Friday? Big win against Scotia Glenville?
Yeah.
All right. What's the occasion today? Face paint.
Coloring.
Okay. Oh, good. Good for you. I got my black on, so today middle school teachers and middle school students are wearing something black. I didn't have a black shirt, so I put this on. All right. We had left off on Friday, so everybody's clear on what to do this week. You should have chapter 10 read for tomorrow's class. Chapter 10 read for tomorrow if it's not already done. And we'll have a quiz and an inquisitive next week on chapter 10. We left off Friday talking about abolitionism, and I think Miss Edgehill had asked me a question about one of the figures listed. One of the abolitionists, was it Harriet? Yeah. Okay, we were talking about the key abolitionist figures and their significance. We're going to be talking a lot throughout the course of the rest of the year on these individuals. If you are ever asked, to write an essay, let's say on one of my exams or even on your Regents exam about abolition, that will most likely be a topic of, God bless you, of one of your essays. These three individuals, Garrison, abolitionist from Boston, okay, Douglas, former slave from Maryland who escaped to the north, and Harriet Tubman, similarly a runaway slave. All three of these are probably the three most influential abolitionists. I'll throw a fourth into the mix, and we'll see from ELA if you guys know who she is. Harriet Beecher Stowe. Harriet Beecher Stowe wrote a very significant novel that, for the first time ever, portrayed what life was like on a plantation in the South. She was an abolitionist from Ohio, and she wrote a story called Uncle Tom's Cabin, which was published in 1852. And up until that point, most Northerners knew slavery existed, but most Northerners did not know the effects that slavery had on the enslaved. And being someone who lived in a border state, Ohio was a free state, Kentucky was a slave state, Harriet Beecher Stowe saw routinely what happened at slave auctions. She saw children being swiped from their mothers at a slave auction. She saw families being separated. So she wrote this novel about what slave life was like, and it immediately became a bestseller, opening people's eyes in the North about slavery and about the horrors of slavery. And before that, like I said, Northerners knew slavery existed, but they didn't know the dirty details about how slaves were beaten, about how slave women were raped, about how families were separated, about all of the horrors of slavery. And her novel is going to be very significant in changing public opinion about slavery in the North. So I'll add a fourth to that list, and at some point during the course of the school year, these four are probably going to be your most significant abolitionists. They are by no means the only four. There are thousands of abolitionists who are going to play an important role, but in terms of American history, these are four of the most significant. They are very important thinkers and activists and orators. Here's a word for you, Callahan. He's not here today, but I'm going to tell him anyway. Orator, O-R-A-T-O-R. Root is aura, like oral. What do you think? Orator. If someone's a good orator, they are what? A powerful what? Speaker, okay? All four of these people had a very, very significant voice. Harriet Tubman, not so much. She was not as outspoken as some of the others in terms of speaking, but her actions were clearly significant. Douglas especially. No man on the planet during his lifetime was more meaningful as a talker, as a speaker about the issue of slavery and abolition. Sadly, recording devices did not exist when Frederick Douglass was alive. We do not have a recording of Frederick Douglass's voice, but I've read first-hand accounts and I've read diary entries about his voice. And another thing that didn't exist in his lifetime was microphones and speakers, which, same with Lincoln, by the way. Lincoln his voice was never recorded because recording equipment did not exist. But both of those men, Douglas especially, were said to have a commanding presence and a commanding voice when they were speaking to large audiences. People were, he was magnetic in the sense that people stopped what they were doing if they heard him speaking, and he had a command of the audience, a commanding presence. The only person I can equate him to today, who you might be familiar with, the voice of Darth Vader in the Star Wars movie is played by an actor named James Earl Jones. Darth Vader, who just a couple weeks ago died in real life, and James Earl Jones had that kind of baritone, very, very deep, commanding voice that kind of commanded attention and respect. So, rise of abolition is going to occur, and this is going to increase sectionalism, okay? in the country as well. We're going to wrap up this PowerPoint, this slideshow, with a couple of slides. We're going to talk a little bit about political parties. Again, we're on slideshow 2. 3 has been shared with you. We'll get to that in a minute. Political parties and sectionalism. We're going to look at what political parties kind of appeal to specific voters. What political parties appeal to specific voters. If you look at a political map today, with a couple of exceptions, and there's always exceptions to the rule, but if you looked at a map today politically, what parts of our country would you find the most left-leaning Democratic populations, populations that vote Democratic? What parts of our country might you find those on a map? If I pulled down the map of the United States today and asked you to tell me where we would find most concentrations, for example, of Democratic voters, where would you tell me, Katie? What states make up large segments of the Democratic voting population? I'd say we're in one. New York, overwhelmingly, because New York City is very, very left-leaning. New York is a Democratic state. California, huge Democratic state. Okay, huge Democratic state. If Satan were a Democrat, California would elect him. That is how safe a Democratic state is for Democratic politicians. So California and New York are clearly Democratic strongholds. Sections of our country tend to vote certain ways. What would be a state, for example, that would lean maybe more Republican than Democrat? Texas. Okay. Would you say something else? Yeah, Texas is clearly a state that will. Now, that is not to say that these states. It's not to say New York doesn't have Republicans. It's not to say that California doesn't. There's certainly members of both parties and other parties, but generally speaking, you're going to have states that are going to lean one way or another. And that was the case during our early period in our history, where sectionalism is going to be reflected with political affiliation. The rise of the Republican Party is going to oppose slavery's expansion. So let's think, Palin, if the rise of the Republican Party is going to reflect opposition to slavery, where do you think most Republican voters in 1850 or 1855 are going to be located? What part of the country? Most Republicans who oppose slavery will be in the North. Okay, will be in the North. If you look at the map here, this is a political map. Red color is going to show where Lincoln, what states Lincoln won. What do you know about the states that Lincoln wins in the 1860 election? They're all where? In the North. Lincoln did not win a single southern state in the 1860 election. He did not win a single southern state, but he still won the election because he carried all the northern states. Democrats are going to split into two sections or into two factions, northern and southern factions. And with the victory in 1860, Lincoln, the Republican, will face the challenge of what state's doing what, Mr. Grogan. What will happen with a number of states when Lincoln becomes elected in 1860? We talked briefly about this a couple of times. Lincoln's elected in 1860 as a Republican. What do 7 southern states and then eventually 11 in total opt to do? Who remembers? They secede. So 11 states will choose to leave the Union after 1860, dividing the country, forming their own country, and bringing the onset of the American Civil War to pass. And that we'll get to. But I don't want to get too far ahead right now. I want to just finish by saying that there's going to be economic interdependence between the three sections. A lot of the sections all had their own culture. In many ways, they had their own way of life. Again, the three sections were the North, the South, and the West. Okay? Despite conflicts, the regions were economically linked, and no other way is this more evident than that northern textiles depended on southern cotton. So here's an interesting thing, guys. I want you to understand this point before we move on. We talk about northern textiles, we're talking about factories that turn cotton into what? Fabric and cloth, okay? So when we talk about textile mills, we're talking about factories that turn cotton into cloth and fabric. And nowhere is this economic interdependence more evident than in the fact that northern factories that process cotton into clothing, where do you think they're getting their cotton from? Where are they buying their cotton from, these northern factories? The southern states. And those southern states are producing that cotton as a result of what type of labor? Slave labor. So there can be an argument, and it's a fairly compelling argument, that even though northern states by 1800 had all abolished slavery, northern states were still profiting from slavery because why? No states in the north will own slaves after 1800, thereabouts. Let's assume that's true, and it is. Why is it a compelling argument to say that the North is not blameless on the issue of slavery after the year 1800? They're still buying cotton from the South that is produced with slave labor. And the northern factories and northern businesses are making money hand over fist on a product that is being produced largely through slave labor. How is that going to affect the North's profits, by the way? Let's think about this from an economic standpoint. How are Northerners going to be able to make even more money on cotton, Palin, if they're buying cotton that's produced by slaves? It's going to be cheaper because the producers of the cotton are not paying what? They're not paying wages to workers. They're not paying wages to workers. So I want you to be thinking that even though slavery was abolished in the northern states by 1800, the North still is responsible for helping perpetuate it because the northern factories and northern businesses are buying cotton manufactured by slaves. Southern plantation owners rely on northern manufactured goods. This is another way. Southern plantation owners can't build their own manufactured goods because they largely lack the factory. So southern businesses and southern plantation owners are going to rely on northern manufactured goods in exchange. And we're going to see as we move through the rest of the school year that this economic interdependence is going to cause even more of these sectional rifts or sectional, when I talk rifts, okay, a rift. What's a rift? R-I-F-T. If you and I have a rift over an issue, Anna, we have a what? Yeah, a huge disagreement. A rift is basically a disagreement, and this rift will become really, really nasty as we move toward 1860. This rift between North and South, the sectional differences. Okay? All right, the road to Civil War. I want to wrap up with this today on topic 2, on section 2. Again, we're getting ahead of ourselves. We're not going to be talking about the Civil War until later in the marking period, but as we talk about sectional differences will lead to Civil War. Sectional differences will lead eventually to Civil War. I think you should jot that down. Sectional differences will push the nation toward war starting in what year? 1861. Okay. The war will begin in 1861, and our country's history before that will be a series of sectional differences that will kind of push and push and push ever so slowly the war to eventually start. Culmination of decades of sectional tensions. The election of Lincoln will be seen as a threat to southern states. Lincoln, I said last week, promised when he was running for office he would not abolish slavery. He promised merely to what? To stop the Well, before states seceded, even before they seceded, he wanted to stop them seceding once they left, and that was the purpose of the war. But when he was running for office around this time in 1860, before the election, in October of 1860 and the summer of that year, Lincoln promised to, because the secession had been a threat, Lincoln promised before the election that if he was elected, he would take no movement to abolish slavery. He merely wanted to stop it from what into the territories, from spreading into the Western territories. That was Lincoln's promise, and the South simply did not believe him. The South did not believe him, and that is why those states leave. Southern states began to secede in December of 1860, right after the election. Civil War begins in 1861, and we'll spend a couple of weeks, 2 weeks, on the Civil War when we get closer to Christmas. Okay, we get closer to Christmas, we'll spend some time on the Civil War, which is one of my favorite topics to teach, and I'm sad I only have 2 weeks to teach it, but we'll have some fun with it. All right. Conclusion: legacy of sectionalism. Sectionalism plays a major role in shaping pre-Civil War America. Again, go back to last week. If I asked Katie, if I asked Lizzie, if I asked Ava, as a visitor to the United States, where are you from? Where are you most likely? How are you most likely to respond to that question? Let's say to a foreigner, if they asked you where you were from, would you identify as a U.S. citizen, or would you identify maybe as a Haley? You would identify what state you were from, or what section of the country. You might say you were a Virginian. You might say you're a Northerner. You might say you're a Yankee. You might, and that term was used before the Civil War, by the way. Yankee was a term used to describe northern business owners, especially shippers. Okay, so most people identified with their state. Okay, highlighted. Sectionalism highlighted the challenges of balancing regional and national interests. Again, what was that three-legged stool we talked about last week that Henry Clay proposed? Henry Clay's three-legged stool, what was that system called? The American system, which the three legs of the stool, he called for what, Palin? What was leg one? Tariff. 1816 tariff on imports. 2? What? Yeah, he wanted national tax dollars to fund infrastructure all around the country, which southern states balked at. They didn't want to have to pay for bridges and tunnels. Hell, they had farms and they had plantations. Why build bridges and tunnels, they said. And what was the third one? Yeah, a national bank. Okay, so legacy of sectionalism highlights the challenges of balancing regional and national interests. Many sectional issues persisted even after the Civil War. And ladies and gentlemen, let me tell you something. Sectional differences persist today. We live in a country that is, and it's pro and con in a lot of ways. We live in a country, we live in a country of 330 million people. We live in a country with various geographic features and climates. It makes sense that there's going to be different parts of the country, different sections of the country that are going to have different ways of life and different interests. Southern interests in many ways are remarkably different from northern interests. Okay, Midwestern interests are oftentimes much different from the interests on the coast, Los Angeles and New York. Okay, we still have sectionalism today, and don't think for a second that we don't. In a country as large as ours, geographically large, okay, we're going to have sections of the country. Okay, there's going to be sectionalism, and I'm hoping. I ordered a political map from C-SPAN. It's a big map that'll take up a whole wall, and it's going to show us 2 colors. It's going to show us red and blue. And we're going to post this, if I get it this week or whenever I get it before the election, I'm going to throw it up on the wall, and we're going to see, based on the color red and based on the color blue, which states in the past 2 election cycles have voted for the Republican candidate, which on a political map is colored what? Red or blue? Red. And we're going to see which states have supported Democratic candidates for president, which on a political map will be colored blue. Okay? Blue. All right? How many sectional issues persist after the Civil War? We could probably spend a whole class talking about sectional issues that persist to this day. I think one of the biggest, and this is just in my lifetime, the South continues, even to this day, to lag behind the rest of the country in academics, especially in like K through 12. Public education has struggled to catch up with the rest of the country in terms of the quality of public education. This is not, it's not a criticism as much as it's an observation, but the South and a lot of southern states lag behind other parts of the country in terms of the quality of public education. And a lot of people attribute that to the fact that public education was not really a priority in the southern states until long, long after public education became commonplace in the northern states, where it was started in Massachusetts and in New York. That's just one area. And we'll talk more on that as we move forward. All right? Open up, if you would please, topic Google Slideshow 3, which should be on your stream at this time. It should be on your stream. If it's not there, I'm going to put it up on the board here. We're going to talk, and again, I wanted to spend today, the rest of class today, talking about this idea of the era of good feelings, the rise and fall of the era of good feelings. To kind of go back to a week ago, the era of good feelings is going to emerge after the end of what war? The what? The War of 1812, that's correct. The era of good feelings is going to rise. War is over. The United States has, for the second time, defeated Great Britain, or at least forced them to a draw, and everybody's rich and happy and feeling good about it. And we're going to see that this period is called the era of good feelings for a reason. And like all eras of good feelings, it's going to come and it's going to go. We're going to have periods in time in our history where, things go for a period of time pretty well, economically, in terms of people being employed, in terms of people having low prices, in terms of people being able to find jobs. We're going to see a lot of peaks and valleys in American history. We're going to key in on a little bit today this era of good feelings, the era of good feelings. All right, so the dawn of the era of good feelings begins with Madison's presidency in 1817. All right, period of national unity and optimism after the War of 1812 had ended, and it was marked by a reduced partisan tensions. Okay, the era of good feelings is going to be characterized by reduced partisan tensions. And what do I mean by that? Well, I'll tell you what I mean. Reduced partisan tensions means that politically, the climate politically is going to be much less animosity toward opposing political parties than existed during the War of 1812. You might remember that one political party, because of the War of 1812, one political party effectively ends its run with the end of the War of 1812. What political party will see its dying days during the end of the War of 1812? It's the political party that called for a convention that wanted to talk about seceding from the Union. The Federalist Party will die after the War of 1812. And one of the reasons we see a reduction in political tensions is because a major political party is now dead and gone. All right, is now dead and gone. And I think we answered the question here. Just an observation, and I like to take time, at least every class period, to try to connect what we're studying in the past to what goes on in our country in a modern time. Most political elections, most national elections, I mean, president, vice president, some Senate seats, most national elections are decided on economic issues. Most presidents win or lose based on the situation with the economy. And after the War of 1812 ends, Americans are in a good place. They're at peace finally. They're no longer at war. Americans want to focus on industry. Americans want to focus on employment. They want to focus on taking advantage of this rise in factories so we can produce our own goods, so they can provide for their families, so we can cut off our imports from other countries. Well, we got an election coming up in less than a month, and a lot of these issues that voters, that your moms and dads, and very soon all of you, a lot of these issues that Americans are facing are issues that oftentimes can decide an election one way or another. And if you look at our economy right now, if you look at the price of goods, if you look at the price of food, if you look at the price of gas, if you look at the price of goods and services, building a house, being able to buy a house appears to be almost out of reach for most Americans under the age of 30 right now because of high costs of building homes and high interest rates. Americans right now, I think there's kind of a feeling in the country that America is on the wrong track. And election cycles are generally ways where Americans historically have let elected officials know one way or the other whether they're happy or whether they're not. So as this election approaches in less than, actually from today, it's 3 weeks. We are going to elect a president in 3 weeks. I'm anxious to find out which way Americans are going to go based on the economy. If you were to base the election on just America's economic situation today, and there's a lot of other, there's a lot of other issues, clearly. There's immigration, there's the issue of women's reproductive freedoms, there's the issue of public education, but economic issues are where most people put their emphasis when they're voting in a national election. I'm anxious to see what's going to happen. I don't think we're in a position right now, to tie it to what we're talking about, I don't think we're in a position right now as a country where people are feeling very positive about the status quo. People are not feeling generally positive and upbeat about our leadership right now, and that is going to bode well for one party, I think, and not so well for the other party, the party that happens to be in power. But we'll see. 3 weeks away, a lot can happen. How many of you are 17? Any 17-year-olds in here? All of you are 16 or 15? Okay. So you guys will get your chance in 2028. You get your chance in 4 years, and you'll have to sit this one out. But that doesn't mean you can't be active. It doesn't mean you can't be engaged and involved. I want you to be focusing over the course of the next 3 weeks. We'll be talking about the election a lot. Once the election passes, we'll be at a point where we can talk more about it. But stay tuned to what's going on, both nationally and locally. Is the election something that your parents and your family talks about? Are these kitchen table discussions that you guys have in your homes? Okay, parents aren't talking about taxes. Parents aren't talking about the cost of groceries. Parents aren't talking about the cost of rent. These are not things that are being discussed. Okay? No? Okay, we'll see. Let's take a look at our author's crucial list.
In 1816, a 4th Virginian, James Monroe, became president. In the aftermath of the War of 1812 and amidst dramatic economic growth and prosperity, James Monroe's administration came to be described as the era of good feelings. Not only was America prosperous, but the opposing party, the Federalists, had virtually died during the War of 1812. So essentially, the Republicans were the dominant political force in the United States, and political debate diminished greatly as the
Are we talking about the same Republican Party that exists today, or are we talking about another Republican Party? It's Jefferson's Democratic-Republican Party, shortened to Republican. Two different parties, two different sets of beliefs, two different attitudes, two different outlooks, but the Republicans that he refers to here are Jefferson's Republicans. Jefferson's Republicans, who were mostly made up of Southern planters, okay? Southern planters and wealthy farmers who viewed the future of America as not so much in industry and manufacturing, but where? In agriculture, in farming. Okay?
Federalist Party virtually disappeared. So the era of good feelings lasted through James Monroe's second administration. So from 1816 to 1820 and into the 1820s, the United States experienced a period of great economic prosperity, political stability, and good feelings. Alas, however, it did not last very long. This so-called era of good feelings began to disappear in 1819 when a terrible financial panic led to an economic recession. And at the same time, the growing division and debate over the future of slavery further divided American opinion and ended the era of good feelings.
He kind of underscores what I mentioned a moment ago. Voters, okay, American people are oftentimes going to be, their attitude about their situation is often going to change based on their fiscal or their economic condition. I saw a video clip over the weekend of a woman who was in Walmart or Target or Costco or some big box store. 3-4 years ago, she bought a grocery list of like 12 or 13 items. She had laundry soap, she had steak, she had hamburger meat. It's basically 12 or 13 items, and the cost of the items was like $56.40. I'm just throwing a number out. She had the exact same items in her shopping cart this past weekend. And she was comparing the receipts in the video. It's kind of cool. The exact same list of items that were $56 in 2019. Anybody want to take a guess as to what they cost today? $56 in 2019, $142 in 2024. And those are the types of issues that can turn people's confidence from an era of good feelings and positive about their country and about the country's future to, a financial panic like we see here is going to happen in the 1820s. This is going to kind of change people's outlooks. And historians, when Monroe was president, Monroe didn't characterize his presidency as the period of good feelings. These are terms that historians kind of use to label, like after the fact. So Monroe probably never used the term, well, I'm the president during the era of good feelings, or the period. No, but historians kind of look at what was going on during those periods, and they kind of categorize or label them. But there's going to be some difficulty that will occur after that will set America back and bring an end to this era of good feelings. Let's talk more about factors contributing to the era of good feelings. Okay? First off, we said the Federalist Party dies out. There's less political infighting. There's less political arguing. Now, it doesn't mean that there's not disagreement. It doesn't mean that the political parties that exist are not jockeying for power and prestige and for control. But generally speaking, the decline of the Federalist Party meant that politically America was more at peace than they were and during the war. There was also a huge sense of nationalism after the war ends. Remember, the United States had defeated Britain for the second time in 30 years. They were confident. They were cocky. They felt accomplished. They felt a national pride in the success of their country. And nothing, I don't think, historically, that a victory in a war can do more to boost national pride than the outcome of a war in a country's favor. So this sense of nationalism after the War of 1812 ends. By the way, the War of 1812, is it fought just in 1812? No, it's fought from 1812 to 1815, and it culminates with which battle in 1850? Who remembers from last week? A couple of weeks ago. Battle of New Orleans culminates, and it was, what's the cool historical fact about the Battle of New Orleans, Anna? Fought after the Treaty of Ghent was signed in 1814. Very good. Also, America is feeling happy that economic growth is occurring and people are gaining more land moving west. Americans are able now to buy cheap, good farmland if they want moving west of the continent. Remember, as Jefferson buys the Louisiana Territory and as presidents that follow after him, begin allowing Americans to move west, the government is selling parcels of land to individuals, and people are able to buy land at dirt cheap prices, encouraging people to move westward across the country. And also, President Monroe is going to make a lot of effort to unite the country after the war, to do what he can to bring those three sections, to the extent that he can, to bring those three sections together, north, south, and west. All right, so factors contributing to the era are there. Okay, President Monroe is going to make efforts to unite the country. Monroe's presidency, he's elected twice. He's reelected easily in 1820. Again, if the president is going to take the blame when the economy is going badly, the opposite is true when the economy is going well. If people are employed, if people are making money, if inflation is low, if goods can be easily afforded, we're going to see presidents, fair or unfair, are going to be given credit for that, and chances are, if a president is successful in those areas, the country's successful in those areas during a president, he or she will be elected. That will happen in 1820. Americans were still employed, they were still making money, factories were booming, and Monroe is going to be the beneficiary of that in 1820 when he was reelected. He toured the country to promote unity. He went on kind of like a tour across the country, stopping in each of the states to kind of let people know where he stood on important issues of the day. And even his political enemies respected that. Even his political enemies respected the fact that he was connected to the people. He went out and he kind of met and got the pulse of the people. Matter of fact, I think that phrase probably came from Monroe's tour of the country. He went out there and he was pretty much listening to what Americans were saying. He kind of got a feel for what Americans were thinking, what Americans were feeling. And that is respected among voters oftentimes. Even if voters don't like a candidate, if that candidate exhibits qualities that show that they're listening, that they care, that they can relate to them. Okay? Interesting thing I read this morning, last topic before the end of the day. Former President Trump is going to appear on a radio show called The Breakfast Club. It's hosted by a talk show host named Charlemagne. You guys are all probably familiar with Charlemagne the God. And Trump is getting a lot of credit for going on Charlemagne the God because he's going to be approaching an audience that over the last 60 years, African Americans have largely not supported Republican candidates. So Trump is getting a lot of credit for at least going on these shows and giving people an opportunity to watch, to hear what he has to say. All right? Alyssa, did you get my email? Check your email.
Okay.
Okay, check your email, please.
Am I seeing